What's up YouTube, Saf here on SuperSaf TV and welcome to another SuperSaf style camera comparison, this time between the Sony Xperia XZ2 and the Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus. So in the usual style, we'll be looking at both the front-facing cameras as well as the rear-facing cameras, at images as well as video too. Do also look out for the audio icon in the corner of the screen, and that will indicate to you which device the audio is coming from, and we'll be switching between these two throughout this video to give you guys a better idea of the differences in audio as well. So we're currently outdoors using the front-facing cameras, just taking a bit of a walk to look at stabilization. And now let's go ahead and run. Both smartphones are mounted to the same rig. And just looking at dynamic range here in the background, we've got lots of light. Now let's move on to the rear-facing cameras. Now we have switched to the rear-facing cameras. We are filming at 4K on both devices. And let's take a bit of a walk to see what the stabilization is like. And now let's run. Now we do have 2x optical zoom on the S9 Plus. This is something that we do not have. We can digitally zoom, but this is never going to be as good as optical zoom. Sun has just come out. Now we do have HDR video on the XZ Plus, so let's switch to that. Now we've switched on HDR on the Sony Xperia XZ2. Let's just try to go to a tricky dynamic range situation here. You will need an HDR display to be able to see this properly. Now we've just switched to 1080p to see what the stabilization is like. We have intelligent active on the XZ2 when we are filming at 1080p. So we're just walking right now. Now let's go ahead and run. Now just doing a quick autofocus test on the XZ2. Seems to be doing okay, but is a little bit slow. Now autofocus test on the S9 Plus. Dual pixel autofocus is definitely faster here, look at that. And yes, I am filming the XZ2 with the S9 Plus. A few people kind of get confused by this test. So that was the video. Now before we move on to images, having a quick look at what we're working with here. For the front-facing cameras, the XZ2 has a 5 megapixel front-facing camera with an f2.2 aperture. The S9 Plus has an 8 megapixel front-facing camera with an f1.7 aperture with autofocus. For the rear-facing cameras, things are quite different. The XZ2 has a single 19 megapixel camera with an f2.0 aperture and electronic image stabilization. The S9 Plus has a dual camera setup, both 12 megapixels. The primary camera has a variable aperture, so it's going to switch between f1.5 as well as f2.4 depending on the light in your environment, and it has optical image stabilization. The secondary camera is a telephoto camera. It's going to give you 2x optical zoom. It has an f2.4 aperture with optical image stabilization. Now, yes, I know the S9 would have been a more comparable device to the XZ2 because it has a single camera and the price is also similar, but unfortunately I don't have the regular S9. I only have the S9 Plus. And the primary camera as well as the front-facing camera is exactly the same on the S9 Plus as it is on the S9. So we will bear that in mind when it comes to the additional features that we get with the secondary camera of the S9 Plus. Final disclaimer, all images and video have been shot at automatic, and this is to keep things as fair as possible. Right, so starting off with some selfies, the first thing you'll notice is that the XZ2 is wider compared to the S9 Plus. And there's some interesting things happening here in terms of the dynamic range. With the S9 Plus, it has definitely favored the foreground. If you look towards my jumper, you can see that quite clearly. Whereas on the XZ2, this has all become black. But on the XZ2, you have details in the clouds, whereas those have been blown out on the S9 Plus. When it comes to detail, the S9 Plus is definitely sharper, and that does come down to the fact that it's got an 8 megapixel camera versus 5 megapixels on the XZ2. And if we do go in 200%, you can see that we can crop in much further on the S9 Plus, and we've got more detail compared to that of the XZ2. Now trying out another shot, the S9 Plus does seem a little bit brighter here, and once again it has favored the foreground in terms of dynamic range, whereas the XZ2 seems to have gone for a bit more of a balanced approach. I think this will come down to personal preference. Now, one of the features that we have with the S9 Plus is Selfie Focus. This is where it's going to blur the background. This is something that I couldn't really find similar on the XZ2. So if you are somebody who's into those portrait selfies, then this is something that you do have on the S9 Plus. Now, low light selfies, here the S9 Plus clearly doing a much better job. It's a much brighter image with so much less noise. I think this is thanks to the f1.7 aperture compared to the f2.2 aperture on the XZ2. And if we use the front-facing flash, although the S9 Plus might be a bit too bright, it's definitely a cleaner image with much less noise. If you look at the XZ2, it's got a bit of a green tint to it, and it's got a lot of noise, especially towards my jacket. Now, moving on to some outdoor shots, we've got a shot here of a flower. Now, the XZ2 is slightly wider compared to the S9 Plus. And if we do go in 200%, you'll see that we have roughly the same angle of view, and that is because you have 19 megapixels on the XZ2. So even though it was a wider image, you can crop in much further. But generally, in terms of the colors and details, I think both are doing a great job. Now, moving on to an outdoor wide shot, I think both are doing good here. Slight differences in color. The S9 Plus is definitely cooler compared to the XZ2. Now, in this situation, we can use the 2x optical zoom on the S9 Plus, and that is going to bring us closer to our subject. We've got a digital zoom on the XZ2, but we do have more detail because of the optical zoom on the S9 Plus. Now, once again, disclaimer, this is because you have the additional camera on the S9 Plus and you are going to be paying more for it. Now, an outdoor wide shot with tricky dynamic range. I really wanted to see how well these do in terms of dynamic range. And here I would have to give the win to the S9 Plus. If you look towards the clouds, things have been blown out quite a bit on the XZ2. On the S9 Plus, things have been maintained much better, but at the same time, you still haven't lost details in the foreground. Now, another disclaimer shot, I just wanted to test out the portrait mode just to see how well the single camera could do on the XZ2. But on the S9 Plus, once again, thanks to that secondary camera, you are getting much better edge detection, and that portrait mode is working really, really well. Now, moving on to low light shots outdoors initially, and the S9 Plus definitely doing better here. You've got a brighter image and it's got more detail. I do think that's thanks to the f1.5 aperture compared to the f2.0 aperture on the XZ2. And if we go in 200%, you can see we've got much more clarity on the S9 Plus, even though we've got more megapixels on the XZ2. Another outdoor shot in low light, once again the S9 Plus with a much brighter image. Going in 200%, although you can crop in further because of the additional megapixels on the XZ2, the S9 Plus is doing a much better job with less noise, better colors, and better detail. Now, final low light test. This is indoors in very, very low light. And once again, the S9 Plus doing exceptional here. It's a much brighter image with so much more detail, and these details have been lost quite a bit on the XZ2. So there we have it, guys, the SuperSaf style camera comparison between the Sony Xperia XZ2 and the Samsung Galaxy S9 Plus. Now, in terms of my opinions, when it comes to selfies, the XZ2 is slightly wider and does try to balance the dynamic range a little bit more, but the S9 Plus has more detail because of the 8 megapixels. You've also got the selfie focus, and it is also better in low light because of the f1.7 aperture. Now for the front-facing camera, when it comes to video, the S9 Plus did favor the foreground for dynamic range, which I did prefer because at the end of the day, I do want my face fully exposed, whereas the XZ2, it was a little bit too dark on there because it was trying to favor the clouds. And the S9 Plus also seemed more stable, although it's not as wide. This is something that I've discussed multiple times before, and the S9 Plus does crop in from the front-facing camera quite a bit to give you more stable footage. I personally do prefer this. One of the things to mention on the S9 Plus, because it has autofocus, I did find it was hunting a little bit, and that is something that you might find a little bit annoying on the S9 Plus. Now when it comes to rear-facing camera images, I think both were good, but overall I think I would have to give the win to the S9 Plus. The XZ2 does have 19 megapixels and is slightly wider, but we all know that it's not all about megapixels when it comes to images. I'd say the S9 Plus had better dynamic range overall. It was also much better in low light with less noise, more colors, as well as more detail, and that is thanks to the wide f1.5 aperture. With the Sony, you still have f2.0 and it's got 19 megapixels, which it is cramming on to that sensor. This is something that I feel that Sony should change, and they should go with 12 megapixels, and that way I think they'd be able to get some better low light shots. Now with the S9 Plus, because it has that secondary camera, you are going to get some additional features such as the optical zoom, as well as the live focus portrait mode, which is going to work much better compared to the XZ2, but you are going to be paying more for that feature. The S9 Plus does come in higher in terms of price compared to the XZ2, so this is something that you definitely have to bear in mind. For video quality wise, I actually think both were good, but the S9 Plus was definitely more stable when walking. I think this is thanks to the optical image stabilization. It also wasn't as jittery as my previous tests, and we have had a camera update on the S9 Plus which seems to have fixed this. With the XZ2, however, you do have 4K HDR, which is something that I wish the S9 Plus had. And if you did look at the colors in the shadows, they were so much better maintained because of 4K HDR on the XZ2 compared to that of the S9 Plus. The S9 Plus, however, does have 4K at 60 frames a second, whereas the XZ2 only has 4K at up to 30 frames a second. Now, this is something that I couldn't really demonstrate in this video because it is exported out at 30 frames a second. For autofocus, I would have to give the win to the S9 Plus. That dual pixel autofocus is super fast. The XZ2 wasn't too bad, but it was definitely much slower compared to the S9 Plus. Now let's talk about slow motion. It's very interesting here because the XZ2, you do have 960 frames a second super slow-mo at 1080p, whereas on the S9 Plus you only have 720p. But on the S9 Plus you do have a longer burst firstly, and secondly you also have automatic motion detection, which is gonna detect motion inside a square and start filming that burst of slow motion, whereas on the XZ2 you do have to press it at the exact time, which is so difficult to do. You may have noticed a bit of a shake on the XZ2 slow motion, and that was because I was trying to press the button at the same time as pressing the lighter, which was really difficult. Now in addition to that, when it comes to regular slow-mo, so this is not a burst, this is just if you want to film continuous slow-mo and slow it down later on, the S9 Plus does let you film slow-mo 1080p at 240 frames a second, whereas the XZ2 only has 720p at 120 frames a second. I'm not sure why this is. I couldn't find an option to enable full HD on here. When I did try, I got this message, and because of these reasons, personally I do prefer the slow-mo on the S9 Plus. But I do think overall it is going to come down to your personal preference and what type of slow-mo you shoot. Finally, the audio, both actually record in stereo sound, which is absolutely great. As you guys know, lots of other devices such as the iPhone 10 as well as the Pixel 2 XL only record in mono. Now overall, I think I did prefer the S9 Plus better. I think it did a slightly better job of cancelling the noise. It was a very windy day, so I couldn't really do much about that, but I think the S9 Plus did do slightly better here. That's what I think anyway. What do you think? Definitely drop me a comment below and let me know your thoughts. Also let me know which SuperSaf style camera comparison you'd like me to do next. And if you want to see lots of images from lots of different devices, then definitely give me a follow on Instagram. I'm at SuperSaf. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it useful. If you did, then please do hit that thumbs up button for me. And if you haven't already, then be sure to subscribe and switch on notifications. There's lots more SuperSaf style videos coming up. Thanks for watching. This is Saf on SuperSaf TV. I'll see you next time.